My aunt secretly put cameras in my house, and when I confronted her, she claimed it was to protect the family and my name's Alex, and I'm 27. I live with my mom Caroline and my 16-year-old sister Ava in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Things were normal, well, as normal as they get, until about 2 weeks ago. It started small. I'd walk into the living room and swear the cushions on the couch had been moved, or I'd find my water bottle from the kitchen counter sitting on the bookshelf. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was stressed or distracted. But then Ava dropped a bombshell that made my stomach turn. One night, she came to my room, holding her blanket like when she was a little kid. "Alex," she whispered, "I think there's something in my room." "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting up. "There's this blinking light in the vent above my bed," she said, her voice trembling. I thought it was a bug, but it's not. I tried to reassure her. It's probably just an old light or something for the HVAC system. But when I checked, it wasn't an old light. It wasn't something harmless. It was a tiny camera. I didn't know how to react at first. Who the hell would put a camera in my little sister's room? I kept my cool and unscrewed the vent. The camera was connected to a small transmitter. I didn't know much about this kind of tech, but it looked professional. Too professional. I told Ava to keep this between us while I figured things out. The next morning, I casually asked my mom if anyone had been in the house for repairs or cleaning lately. She looked confused and said no. I pushed harder, asking if anyone had keys to the house besides us. She hesitated. "Well, your Aunt Grace comes by sometimes. She's been helping out while I've been busy at work." "Why do you ask?" That sent up a red flag. Grace has always been peculiar. She's my mom's older sister, in her late 50s. But she's the type who's always trying to stick her nose in everyone's business. She's the self-appointed matriarch of the family, always going on about protecting our legacy and keeping the family strong. Grace had been around more than usual lately, showing up unannounced to check on things. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now I was suspicious. I decided to do a sweep of the house. I didn't want to scare Ava or tip off Grace, so I waited until my mom and sister were out running errands. Starting with the most obvious spots, I inspected vents, bookshelves, and light fixtures. And sure enough, I found 2 more cameras, one in the living room and one in the kitchen. Each was small, discreet, and carefully placed. I took photos of everything and then called my best friend Jason. Jason's been my go-to guy since high school. He's the tech-savvy one in our group. I needed his opinion on what I was dealing with. When he came over, he took one look at the cameras and whistled. "These aren't cheap, man. Whoever put these here knows what they're doing." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise felt like someone creeping through the house. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes watching. The next day, I decided I couldn't sit on this any longer. I drove over to Grace's house, a pristine little place that she kept looking like a magazine cover. She greeted me with her usual over-the-top smile, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes when I mentioned the cameras. "Grace," I said, keeping my voice steady, "why are there cameras in our house?" Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Cameras? Oh, Alex, don't be ridiculous." "I'm not being ridiculous," I snapped, pulling out my phone to show her the photos. "I found these. In Ava's room, in the kitchen, in the living room. What the hell is going on?" She sighed, clasping her hands together like she was about to deliver a sermon. "Alex, you don't understand. This is for the good of the family." "What does that even mean?" I shot back, my voice rising. "It's about protection," she said firmly. "We've all been through so much. Your dad leaving, Caroline struggling to make ends meet, Ava growing up in such a chaotic world. I'm just trying to keep an eye on things, to make sure we're safe." Safe? The word churned in my stomach. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. Grace had always been a control freak, but this was a whole new level. "You can't just spy on us and call it protection, Grace. Do you have any idea how creepy this is? How illegal?" Her expression hardened. "Don't take that tone with me, Alex. You think you know everything, but you don't. There are things you're too young to understand." Before I could press her further, she abruptly stood and opened the door. "You'll thank me someday," she said, her voice cold. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." I left her house more confused and furious than ever. The cameras weren't about protection, at least not in the way she claimed. There was something bigger going on, and I was going to figure it out. When I got back home, I found Ava in the living room, staring at me with wide eyes. "Alex," she said quietly, "there's another camera. I found it in the hallway." I couldn't believe it. Another camera? Ava had found it tucked into the molding of the hallway ceiling, its tiny lens barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. The same brand, the same sleek design as the others. Grace wasn't even trying to hide how invasive this was. I knelt down to Ava's level and gently grabbed her shoulders. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "But I need you to keep this quiet, okay? Not even Mom can know right now." She nodded, her face pale. "Alex, is someone trying to hurt us?" The fear in her voice hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell her no, that everything was fine, but I couldn't. "Not yet. I won't let anything happen to you," I promised. "But I need to figure out what's going on." After Ava went to bed, I called Jason again and filled him in. "For cameras now," I said, pacing my room. "One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in Ava's room, and now the hallway." "What the hell is Grace doing?" "She's got too much time on her hands," Jason said. "That's what happens when nosy relatives retire early." This is more than nosy. She's obsessed. And her whole "it's for the family" excuse? I don't buy it. There's something else going on here. Jason was quiet for a moment. "You said she's been around your house more lately, right? Maybe she planted the cameras to dig up dirt on you guys." "For what?" I asked, exasperated. "Leverage? Blackmail?" "She's my aunt, not some corporate spy. People do crazy things when they want control," he said. "Look, I can help you scan for more cameras. There's software that can detect wireless signals, even the hidden ones." "Perfect. Can you come by tomorrow?" Jason agreed, but his tone was cautious. "Just be careful, Alex. If Grace is this deep into your business, there's no telling how far she'll go." The next morning, I had to act normal, which wasn't easy. Every time Grace's name came up, I felt my blood boil. At breakfast, I asked Mom about her again, trying to see if she knew anything. "She's just looking out for us," Mom said, sipping her coffee. "She's family. That doesn't mean she can show up uninvited and act like she owns the place," I snapped. Mom frowned. "You're overreacting, Alex. Grace has always been there for us. You know she helped us keep this house after your dad left." There it was again, the vague gratitude Mom always threw out when Grace's name came up. "But why does she care so much?" I asked. "She acts like she's protecting some big family secret." Mom's hand froze midair, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Her expression softened, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "Grace has always been intense," she said carefully. "She takes her role in the family seriously, sometimes too seriously. But she means well." I wanted to push her, to ask if she knew about the cameras, but something held me back. If Mom was hiding something, I needed proof before confronting her. Jason showed up that afternoon with a small black device that looked like a radar gun. "This is going to pick up anything broadcasting a signal," he said. "If the cameras are active, we'll find them." We started upstairs, combing through every room methodically. Jason swept the device over every corner while I checked vents, light fixtures, and furniture. It didn't take long to find 2 more cameras, one in my mom's room and one in my own. I felt my stomach turn as I stared at the tiny lens hidden in my closet. This wasn't just about spying on the family. Grace had been watching me, in my most private moments. The thought made my skin crawl. Jason shook his head. "This is messed up, man. Who does this to their own family?" "Someone who's hiding something," I said, my voice tight. "I'm done playing nice. Grace is going to explain everything, or I'm calling the cops." That night, Madison came over. She could tell something was wrong the moment she saw me. "You've been weird all week," she said, folding her arms. "What's going on?" I hesitated. Madison was my girlfriend, but we'd only been together for 6 months. I wasn't sure how much to tell her. "It's complicated," I said. "Family stuff." She raised an eyebrow. "Try me." So I told her, about the cameras, about Grace, about everything I'd found. Madison's eyes widened as I spoke. When I was done, she sat back on the couch, shaking her head. That's insane. Why would your aunt do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said. But she's not talking, and my mom keeps defending her. Madison frowned. Do you think your mom knows about the cameras? I don't know. I want to believe she doesn't, but the way she talks about Grace, it's like she's scared of her. Or indebted to her. Maybe she is, Madison said quietly. If Grace helped her keep the house, maybe she feels like she owes her. That thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Grace had always been the one to swoop in and save the family when things went wrong. But now it felt like she was holding those favors over us. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. Grace wasn't the type to leave a paper trail, but she was old school enough to keep physical records. If she had something to hide, it was probably at her house. Breaking into my aunt's house wasn't exactly on my bucket list, but I was desperate. I waited until she left for her weekly yoga class, then parked down the street and slipped inside through the back door. She'd always kept a spare key under the garden gnome by the patio, one of her few predictable habits. The house was immaculate, as always. It didn't even look lived in, more like a model home. I headed straight for her office, a small room off the main hallway. The desk drawers were locked, but a quick search of the room turned up a key taped under the desk. Inside, I found what I was looking for. Folders labeled with our names. Caroline, Alexander, Ava. My hands trembled as I opened the folder with my name on it. It was filled with photos, printouts of emails, even old report cards. She'd been tracking me for years. One page stood out, a bank statement with my mom's name on it. A large deposit had been made 3 years ago, around the time we were struggling to pay the mortgage. The sender's name was blacked out, but I had a feeling Grace was behind it. The other folders were just as detailed. Ava's contained notes about her school performance, her friends, even her favorite hobbies. My mom's folder was the thickest, filled with financial records, medical bills, and old letters. But one document caught my eye, a handwritten note with the words Daniel and Legacy circled. Who the hell was Daniel? And what did Legacy mean? I didn't have time to figure it out. A car pulled into the driveway, and I barely managed to put everything back before slipping out the back door. My heart pounded as I drove home, my mind racing with questions. Grace wasn't just spying on us. She was keeping tabs on every aspect of our lives. But why? When I got home, Ava was waiting for me in the living room. Alex, she said, her voice shaky. You need to see this. She handed me a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. It was on the porch, she said. There's no return address. I opened it carefully, half expecting a bomb. Inside was a USB drive and a note that read, "You're being watched too. Don't trust anyone." The USB drive felt heavier than it should have. Ava hovered beside me, her wide eyes fixed on the plain black plastic like it might explode. I glanced at her and tried to force a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. "I'll figure this out." Once Ava was asleep, I locked my door, plugged the drive into my laptop, and held my breath. It opened immediately, revealing a single video file labeled, "Watch Me." I hesitated. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind ran wild with what could be on that file. Evidence of Grace's spying, some creepy message, or something worse. With a deep breath, I clicked play. The screen lit up with grainy footage of my own living room. My stomach churned as I realized it was from one of the hidden cameras. The angle shifted, showing Ava sitting on the couch, reading a book. Then it cut to me in the kitchen, talking to Jason. The timestamps were recent, just days old. Suddenly, the footage changed. A man appeared on the screen, standing in the middle of my living room. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He walked slowly, deliberately, scanning the room like he was looking for something, or someone. I rewound the footage, pausing on his face. Though most of it was obscured by the cap, there was something about his posture, his movements, that felt eerily familiar. Was this the mysterious Daniel mentioned in Grace's files? And why was he in my house? The video ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Someone was trying to send me a message, but I didn't know if they were an ally or a threat. The next day, I decided to confront Grace again. This time, I wasn't going to let her brush me off. I stormed into her house, not even bothering to knock. She was sitting at the dining table, calmly sipping tea like she didn't have a care in the world. "Alex," she said, setting her cup down. "What a surprise." "Cut the crap, Grace," I snapped, pulling the USB drive from my pocket. "What the hell is this? And who the hell is Daniel?" Her face tightened for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coolly. "Don't lie to me," I growled. "I found your little folders. I know you've been spying on us. I know you've been watching me." Grace sighed, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Alex, you don't understand. Everything I've done has been for the family." "There it is again," I said, laughing bitterly. "The family. What does that even mean? Do you think planting cameras in our house is protecting us? Do you think stalking us makes you some kind of hero?" Her eyes hardened. "You have no idea what's at stake." "Then explain it to me," I shouted. "Because right now, it looks like you're just a control freak with a god complex." For a moment, I thought she was going to lash out. But then she stood, smoothing her skirt, and walked over to a cabinet. She pulled out a stack of old photos and placed them on the table in front of me. The photos were faded, black and white snapshots of people I didn't recognize, men and women, some dressed in suits, others in uniforms. In one photo, a young woman who looked eerily like Grace stood beside a man in a military uniform. Scribbled on the back was the name Daniel. "This," Grace said, tapping the photo, "is our family's legacy. For generations, we've been part of something bigger than ourselves. Something important." "Spying on your own family is important?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Grace ignored me. "Daniel was my father's partner during the war. He protected our family from people who wanted to destroy us. And now, it's my turn to protect you." "From what?" I demanded. "Who's trying to destroy us?" Grace hesitated, then shook her head. "You wouldn't understand." I slammed my hands on the table. "Stop treating me like a child. If you want me to trust you, start talking." She leaned in, her voice low and tense. "Do you think your father just left us? That he walked away from his family without a second thought? There are things in this world, Alex, things that most people will never understand. Your father got too close to one of those things, and it cost him everything." "What does that have to do with cameras in our house?" I asked, still not buying her cryptic nonsense. Grace's face darkened. "Because whatever took your father is still out there, and it's watching us." I left Grace's house more confused than ever. Her cryptic warnings sounded like paranoid ramblings, but the footage on the USB drive proved there was something real going on. And whoever had sent me that package clearly knew more than I did. When I got home, Madison was waiting for me. "I found another one," she said, holding up a small camera. "This one was in your car." I stared at the camera, my anger boiling over. Grace's reach was everywhere. She wasn't just invading my house. She was invading my life. "This has to stop," I said through gritted teeth. "Grace is playing some sick game, and I'm done letting her win." Madison grabbed my hand. "Alex, be careful. If Grace is this deep into your life, there's no telling what she'll do if you push her too far." "Then it's time I push back," I said. That night, I stayed up researching everything I could about Grace, Daniel, and this so-called legacy. It didn't take long to find some troubling connections. Grace had been involved in a series of shady real estate deals over the past decade, using shell companies to buy up properties under different names. One of those properties was a warehouse on the outskirts of town, listed under the name Daniel. Why was Grace hiding a warehouse? And what was she doing there? Jason agreed to help me investigate. The next day, we drove out to the address, a nondescript building surrounded by a chain-link fence. The windows were blacked out, and a single security camera hung over the front door. "This place gives me the creeps," Jason said, glancing around nervously. "Let's just see what we can find," I said, cutting the lock on the gate with bolt cutters. Inside, the warehouse was dark and empty, except for a single table in the center of the room. On it was a laptop and a stack of files. I flipped through the files, my blood running cold as I read the names. Caroline, Alexander, Ava. The same kind of detailed dossiers Grace had in her house, but these were more recent and more invasive. The laptop was password protected, but Jason managed to crack it. What we found made my stomach churn. Live feeds from the cameras in my house, along with detailed notes about my movements, Ava's schedule, and even Madison's visits. "This isn't just spying," Jason said, his voice shaking. "This is surveillance." Before I could respond, we heard footsteps outside. Someone was coming. "Grab the files," I whispered, stuffing as many as I could into my bag. "We have to go." Jason grabbed the laptop, and we slipped out the back door just as the front door opened. I caught a glimpse of the man from the video, the one in the baseball cap. Daniel. Jason and I didn't stop running until we were back in my car, panting like we just sprinted a marathon. My mind was racing faster than my pulse. Daniel was real. He was working with Grace, or worse, pulling the strings. And now he knew someone had been in the warehouse. Jason slammed the laptop onto the dashboard. "We shouldn't have gone in there. That guy looked like he could break us in half." I ignored him and started the car. We needed proof. Now we have it. As I drove back toward town, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I know what you took. Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I showed the message to Jason. His face paled. "Do you think it's Daniel?" "Who else could it be?" I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "He was probably watching us on one of those cameras." Jason shook his head. "This is bad, Alex. You've got some serious players involved here. Grace isn't just some nosy aunt. She's part of something bigger. And now you're on their radar." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my room felt like someone lurking, every creak of the house like an intruder sneaking in. I sat at my desk, flipping through the files we'd taken from the warehouse. They were worse than I'd expected. Each file detailed intimate parts of our lives: financial records, medical histories, schedules, even photos taken without our knowledge. There were notes about Ava's school friends, Madison's social media activity, and even Jason's visits to my house. The files were meticulously organized, like someone had been tracking us for years. The most chilling part was the section labeled incidents. It listed moments from our past that Grace couldn't possibly have known about. Arguments, private conversations, even secrets I'd never shared with anyone. It was as if every moment of our lives had been cataloged. At the bottom of my file was a handwritten note. "Alexander is the key. Protect at all costs." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. What the hell did that mean? Why was I the key? And what was I supposed to be protecting? The next morning, I called Madison. I needed someone to ground me, to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. She came over immediately, her expression full of worry. "What's going on?" she asked as I pulled her into my room and locked the door. I showed her the files and explained everything: Daniel, the warehouse, the cameras, the surveillance. By the time I finished, she looked like she was ready to throw up. "This is insane," she said. "Why would Grace do this? Why would she think any of this is okay?" "She's not just doing this for herself," I said. "She's working with Daniel. I think this legacy she keeps talking about has something to do with him." Madison frowned. "Do you think she's dangerous?" I hesitated. "I don't know, but she's not going to stop. Not unless I make her." Madison grabbed my hand. "Then I'm going to help you." "No," I said firmly. "This is too dangerous. I don't want you getting hurt." "Alex," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I'm already involved. They've been watching me too, remember? I'm not just going to sit on the sidelines while you deal with this." I wanted to argue, but deep down, I knew she was right. I couldn't do this alone. Over the next few days, Madison and I worked on a plan. We decided to confront Grace one last time, but this time, we'd be ready. We installed hidden cameras in my house, this time ones I controlled, so we could document anything Grace or Daniel did. We also backed up all the files from the warehouse onto multiple hard drives, just in case. Then I got another text from the unknown number. "You have one day to return what you took, or everyone you love will pay the price." I showed the message to Madison, my hands shaking. "They're escalating. They're not just threatening me anymore." "We need to do this now," she said, "before they get a chance to follow through." That evening, I invited Grace over under the pretense of wanting to make peace. She arrived promptly, dressed in her usual perfectly pressed clothes and wearing her usual overly sweet smile. But there was something in her eyes, calculation, suspicion. "Alex," she said, sitting down in the living room. "I'm glad you're ready to listen." "Cut the act, Grace," I said, crossing my arms. "I know everything. About the cameras. About Daniel. About the files. You've been spying on us for years, and I want to know why." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "I've told you already. Everything I've done is to protect this family." "Protect us from what?" I demanded. "Because it sure as hell isn't burglars or bad influences." "What's really going on?" Grace sighed and leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Alex, there are forces in this world that you can't even begin to comprehend. Your father tried to fight them, and it destroyed him. I won't let the same thing happen to you." "What forces?" I pressed. "What are you so afraid of?" She hesitated, then said a single word, "Daniel." Before I could respond, there was a loud bang at the front door. Madison and I exchanged panicked glances as Grace's face twisted into a look of fear. I rushed to the door and peeked through the peephole. Daniel was standing on the porch, his baseball cap pulled low, and his hand resting on the doorframe like he owned the place. Grace shot to her feet. "You shouldn't have taken those files, Alex. You told him I have them?" I hissed, betrayal slicing through me. "I had to," she said, her voice shaking. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Then help me understand," I said. "Because right now, it looks like you've been working with him all along." "I'm not working with him," she snapped. "I'm trying to stop him." Before I could process her words, the door burst open, and Daniel stepped inside. His presence filled the room, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Enough games," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Give me the files, or I'll burn this house to the ground." Madison grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Alex, don't." I clenched my fists, my mind racing. If I gave him the files, he'd just keep coming after us. But if I didn't, there was no telling what he'd do. "You have no idea what you're involved in," Daniel said, taking a step closer. "You're nothing but a pawn in a game you can't win." Grace moved between us, her hands raised. "Daniel, stop. He's just a kid." "Not anymore," Daniel said coldly. "He made his choice." The tension in the room was suffocating. Daniel's eyes locked on me, unblinking and ice-cold. Grace stood between us, her hands trembling but raised in a futile attempt to keep him at bay. "You don't have to do this," Grace said, her voice shaking. "He doesn't understand. He's not ready." Daniel's lip curled into a sneer. "He made himself part of this when he took what wasn't his. The files, Grace. Now." I took a step back, pulling Madison with me. My mind was racing, desperate for a way out. Jason had the backups. We'd planned for this, but it didn't feel like enough. Not when Daniel was right here, breathing down my neck. "You're not getting anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You think you can scare me into giving you what you want, but you're wrong." Daniel took another step forward, his sheer presence forcing me back. "Do you even know what you've done?" he asked. "You've put everyone you care about in danger. Those files weren't just surveillance. They're a map, a guide. And now, thanks to you, that information is loose." "Loose?" I echoed, confused. "What are you talking about?" Before Daniel could answer, Grace interrupted. "Stop it. He doesn't need to know everything." Daniel's eyes flicked to her, filled with contempt. "You've coddled him long enough. The boy's ignorance has put us all at risk." Grace's face fell, her usual mask of control slipping for the first time. "Alex," she said softly, "you have to give the files back. If you don't, they'll come after all of us." "Who's they?" I demanded. "What are you so afraid of?" Grace hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she let out a shaky breath. "There's a group," she said. "Powerful people. They've been watching our family for generations. Your father, he tried to stop them. He thought he could take them down, but they were too strong." "And the cameras?" I asked. "Was that part of your plan to stop them too?" "I wasn't trying to stop them," Grace said. "I was trying to protect you. The cameras were supposed to keep us safe." To make sure they didn't get too close. Daniel scoffed. And you did such a great job, didn't you? I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they painted was horrifying. My father hadn't left us. He'd been silenced. And now, because of Grace's paranoid attempts at protection, we were in more danger than ever. Madison squeezed my hand, grounding me. Alex, she whispered, we have to get out of here. But before I could move, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. A sleek black box with a single blinking light. He pressed a button, and a sharp, high-pitched noise filled the room. Madison winced, covering her ears, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What the hell is that? I shouted. It's a jammer, Daniel said. Every camera, every device you have recording this conversation is now useless. You really thought you could outsmart me? Panic flared in my chest. He wasn't wrong. The cameras Jason and I had set up were now worthless, and the files I'd stolen suddenly felt like a hollow shield. But then I remembered the backups. Jason still had the hard drives. If I could stall Daniel long enough, I might be able to get word to him. You're not as smart as you think, I said, forcing myself to sound confident. Those files? They're already gone. Uploaded to the cloud. If anything happens to me, they go public. It was a bluff, a dangerous one, but it worked. Daniel's expression darkened, and he lowered the jammer. You're bluffing, he said, but there was doubt in his voice. Try me, I said. You think I'm just some kid playing detective? Go ahead. Push me. For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the jammer. Then Daniel stepped back, his jaw tight with frustration. This isn't over, he said. You've made enemies you can't even begin to understand. He turned to leave, but not before giving Grace a pointed look. Clean this up or I will. And then he was gone. The moment the door closed behind him, Grace sank into a chair, her head in her hands. You have no idea what you've done, she said, her voice muffled. Maybe you should start explaining, I said, crossing my arms. Because I'm tired of being kept in the dark. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn. The files you took, they're not just about us. They're about them. Their connections, their weaknesses. Your father gathered that information before he disappeared. I've been keeping it hidden, but now you've brought it into the open. Good, I said. If these people are so dangerous, maybe exposing them is the only way to stop them. You don't understand, Grace said, shaking her head. If those files go public, it won't just be them coming after us. It'll be everyone. The media, the authorities, their enemies. We'll be caught in the crossfire. So what do you suggest? Madison asked. Just hand everything back and hope for the best? Grace didn't answer. Her silence said enough. I spent the next few days in a state of constant paranoia. Every shadow looked like Daniel. Every strange car parked on the street felt like a threat. Jason stayed hidden with the backups, but he was just as terrified. Madison refused to leave my side, even though I begged her to stay away for her own safety. And then it happened. One night, I came home to find the front door ajar. My heart sank as I stepped inside, calling out for Ava and my mom. The house was eerily silent, every room perfectly tidy except for Ava's. Her bed was unmade, her favorite blanket missing. I found a note on her desk. It was short and chilling. She's safe for now. Return what you took. Grace arrived minutes after I called her, her face a mask of grim determination. This is your fault, she snapped. If you had just listened to me. This isn't the time, Madison cut in. We need to figure out how to get Ava back. Grace hesitated, then nodded. We'll call Daniel. We'll give him what he wants. No, I said firmly. If we give him the files, he'll just keep coming after us. We need to end this. And how do you propose we do that? Grace asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We expose him, I said. We expose all of them. The plan was risky, but it was the only option we had left. Jason uploaded a portion of the files to an anonymous server, along with a detailed letter explaining who Daniel was and what he'd done. We sent the link to several journalists, law enforcement agencies, and even a few activist groups. Then we waited. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, News outlets were running stories about the secretive group Daniel worked for, exposing their connections to corruption and illegal activities. Grace's fears were justified. There was chaos. But amidst the chaos, we got Ava back. She was dropped off at a nearby park, unharmed but terrified. Grace stayed behind to comfort her while Madison, Jason, and I waited for the inevitable. Daniel didn't show up again. Maybe he'd gone underground, or maybe he'd been silenced by his own people. Either way, the threat felt less immediate. For now, in the weeks that followed, I tried to put my life back together. The cameras were gone, the files were out of my hands, and my family was safe, for now. Grace stayed distant, her relationship with my mom strained but not broken. Madison stayed by my side, her quiet strength keeping me grounded, but the scars were still there. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, didn't fade. And the words at the bottom of my file, ***, Alexander is the key. Protect at all costs, still haunted me. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing is certain. I'm not the same person I was. My family's secrets almost destroyed me, but they also made me stronger. Whatever comes next, I'll be ready.